My name is Layla. I'm 32 years old. And the night my father introduced my older brother Rayan to a room full of investors as a self-made entrepreneur. I was sitting in the third row with a folder in my lap containing 46 wire transfer receipts totaling $219,000. Every cent of it was mine before I tell you what happened in that room and what I did afterward. Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat in a crowd and watched someone accept credit for your entire life's work? Have you ever felt applause land on someone else's chest while your hands were the ones that built everything they were being praised for? That is where I was that Thursday evening in November, inside the grand atrium of the Meridian Business Forum, wearing the green dress I had bought for myself on my last birthday, because I had promised I would stop saving every dollar for Rayan's emergencies and spend something on me for once. The dress still had the tag tucked inside the collar because I had almost returned it twice to fund two of those emergencies. I didn't return it. I wore it, and I sat there watching my brother shake hands with men who didn't know my name. Let me take you back to the beginning because this story doesn't start with a dinner, or a betrayal, or a dramatic confrontation. It starts with love. Quiet, uncomplicated, foolish love. The kind you have for someone before you understand that some people are trained by life to consume that love and call it support. Ryan is 4 years older than me. Growing up in our household, that age gap felt like a canyon. He was the firstborn son in a Lebanese-American family where firstborn sons are raised to carry the family name and youngest daughters are raised to hold the family together. Not the same thing. Never the same thing. Rayan got the stories told about him at dinner tables. I got the thank yous whispered in kitchens. I did not resent it for a long time. I loved my brother the way you love something that has always been there, without analyzing it, without demanding anything in return. When we were children, he was the one who stayed up with me during thunderstorms and let me sleep at the foot of his bed when I was afraid. When I was in high school and struggling with calculus, he drove 40 minutes to my school on his lunch break to sit with me in the library for an hour and explain derivatives until they finally made sense. That version of Rayan is the version I kept believing in for far too long. After college, I went into financial consulting. Numbers had always made sense to me in a way that people sometimes didn't. I was good at seeing patterns in spreadsheets that other people missed. I was promoted twice in my first 3 years. Built a small but solid investment portfolio of my own. And by the time I was 27, I had a savings account that represented 5 years of discipline and sacrifice. Rayan had a dream. He wanted to build a tech-enabled logistics company connecting small businesses in our region to freight carriers at negotiated rates. The idea itself was not bad. The execution plan was ambitious. The financial discipline required to sustain it was something he had never demonstrated in his life. But when he came to me with a pitch deck, he had spent 3 weeks building and eyes full of the kind of hope that you cannot say no to when you love someone. I said yes. I said yes to the first $50,000 as a personal loan. I wrote up a repayment agreement. Simple, 1 page, signed by both of us. He would repay me within 30 months with a modest interest rate that I had reduced 3 times before showing it to him, because I didn't want it to feel like I was profiting from family. That was my first mistake. Not the loan. The apology built into the loan. The first 12 months were promising. Rayan hired a small team, secured 2 mid-sized contracts, and sent me partial repayments 4 months in a row. I remember feeling proud of him in a way that was completely genuine. I told my best friend Dina Halil that maybe I had been wrong to worry. Maybe Rayan's instincts were sound. Maybe this would work. Then a larger carrier pulled their contract 6 months and due to a pricing dispute Rayan had mismanaged. Then one of his early hires left and took 2 client relationships with them. Then the software platform his entire dispatch system ran on doubled its enterprise pricing overnight. And Rayan called me on a Tuesday morning before I had even finished my coffee to tell me he was 1 week away from missing payroll. I transferred $22,000 by noon. That was the second loan. This one had no agreement. Just a text message from him saying, "You're saving me," and me responding, "I know you'll handle it. I should have heard the difference. He said I was saving him.
He did not say he would repay me over the next 18 months.
The pattern established itself the way bad patterns always do, gradually and then completely. A lease extension here. An equipment deposit there. Insurance premiums I covered because his card was declined. A bridge payment to a vendor who threatened to go to collections. Each time, Rayan called in the language of crisis. And I responded in the language of loyalty. He was always 1 month from turning the corner. He was always 3 good. Contracts away from stability. He was always so close. Layla, just this once, just until things settle down. Things never settled down. They just required more settling. What I did not fully understand until much later was the architecture of it. Rayan was not stupid. He was, in fact, quite strategic. He kept me close enough to feel essential, but far enough to be invisible. He never put my name on anything. No letterhead, no partner agreements, no investor documentation. Officially, I did not exist inside his company. I was not a lender on paper. I was not an investor on paper. I was not even listed as an emergency contact with his accountant. I was the person he called before the official calls. I was the solution that kept the official calls from ever having to happen. And the entire time, my family watched and called it sisterly love. My mother, Hannah, is a warm woman who expresses affection through food and proximity and a complete inability to see her children's faults clearly. She knew I was helping Rayan. She knew in the vague way that mothers know things they prefer not to examine too closely. When I mentioned once, carefully, that the loans were adding up and I wasn't sure the repayment timeline was realistic, she set a plate of kibbeh in front of me and said, "He's your brother, Layla. What do you want me to say?" My father, Kareem, is a man who spent his career as a civil engineer and speaks in measurements and load-bearing calculations in every context, except the one where it would help most, his own family. He knew numbers. He reviewed blueprints for a living. But he had decided, at some point before I was born, that Rayan's narrative would be the one he invested in. Not because he didn't love me, but because that was the shape of the world he had inherited and never questioned. When Rayan told him the business was growing, my father nodded with satisfaction. When I quietly mentioned I had covered the last insurance premium, my father said, "You two work it out between yourselves." That sentence covered everything and explained nothing and gave Rayan all the permission he ever needed. The Meridian Business Forum invitation came 8 months before the actual event. Rayan called me, genuinely excited, the most alive I had heard him sound in 2 years. A regional business development organization had selected 20 entrepreneurs for a spotlight showcase. Investors attended. Press attended. It was the kind of evening that could, legitimately, change the trajectory of a business if things went well. He wanted to prepare. He needed a marketing consultant. He needed a pitch coach. He needed a new operations summary prepared by someone who could make the numbers look defensible. I am a financial consultant. I spent 40 hours of my personal time over 3 weekends, rebuilding his financial narrative into something presentable and honest. I contacted a pitch coach friend of mine, Sana, and arranged a reduced-rate coaching package for him. I drafted the 1-page operations summary myself. He stood in front of a mirror in my living room and practiced his speech while I gave feedback from the couch. I did not think I was doing anything extraordinary. I thought I was helping my brother succeed. I thought there was a world where his success and my contribution could exist in the same sentence. I was wrong about that. The night of the forum, I arrived early and took my seat in the 3rd row. I had not been offered a seat at the table with the presenting entrepreneurs, which was fine, they were the presenters. But I had not been mentioned in the program either. Not as a financial advisor, not as a consultant, not even in the acknowledgments section that 3 other entrepreneurs had used to. Thank their support networks. I told myself it was an oversight. I told myself he would mention me in the speech. I sat with my folder in my lap and my green dress and my 3-year-old earrings that I had worn to every important occasion since I bought them because they were the last truly unnecessary thing I had bought for myself before Rayan's. Emergencies became my budget. My father sat 2 rows behind me with my uncle Tariq, who had flown in from Houston specifically for this evening. My mother sat beside my father, already holding her phone to record. Around us, 200 people in business attire talked quietly about deals and forecasts and the kind of futures that cost money. To imagine, the host took the stage at 7 o'clock exactly. The spotlight presentations began. Rayan was fourth. When his name was called, I felt something I can only describe as hope. Not for myself. For him. For the version of him that had slept at the foot of his bed with me during thunderstorms. For the version that drove 40 minutes to explain derivatives. I still love that version, and I wanted this night to be real for him. He walked to the podium with the posture of someone who had rehearsed confidence until it was almost genuine. He wore the gray suit he had bought 6 months earlier. He smiled at the audience the way a man smiles when he believes. He has arrived, and then he began. He spoke about building something from nothing. He spoke about the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the moments of near collapse that he had personally navigated through sheer determination. He spoke about believing in a vision when no one else understood it. He used the phrase self-funded twice. He used the phrase bootstrapped with personal resources. He said I had no investors, no safety net, no one to fall back on. Just a laptop, a lease, and an unshakable belief that this would work. The applause was warm and genuine. I did not move. I sat completely still and let the sound wash over me. I looked at my brother behind the podium and waited for the correction. For the addendum. For the moment where he said, and of course I have to acknowledge my sister, without whom none of this would have been financially possible. That moment did not come. He finished his speech, stepped off the stage, and walked directly to a cluster of investors near the back left of the room. He did not look at me. He did not look at the 3rd row at all. My mother turned around and found my face in the crowd. She gave me a smile that said, "Wasn't that wonderful?" It was the smile of a woman who had not heard anything wrong. My father caught my eye and nodded once. The satisfied nod of a man watching a blueprint come together. My uncle Tariq said something to my father, and they both chuckled quietly. I opened the folder in my lap. I looked at the first transfer receipt. $50,000 3 years ago. Then the next. $22,000 month 14. I turned the pages slowly, not counting, just reading dates and amounts the way you read a record of your own life. 2 years of decisions laid flat on paper, each one made in good faith, each one absorbed without acknowledgement. I closed the folder. I stood up. The forum was in a brief intermission between presentations. People were moving, refilling drinks, networking. I walked toward the investor cluster where Rayan was holding court. He was in the middle of a sentence when I arrived beside him. He glanced at me and the sentence continued without a pause. I waited. He finished his point. The small group laughed politely. And then one of the investors, a woman named Patricia Holt, whose name tag identified her as a managing partner at a regional venture firm, turned to me and said, "Are you with the company?" I said, "I'm Rayan's sister." Rayan said, "Layla, hey," and made the very brief social gesture of an introduction before steering Patricia's attention back toward himself. Patricia, however, looked at me with the polite curiosity of someone who knew how rooms worked. She asked, "Do you work in the industry?" I said, "I'm a financial consultant. I actually built the operations summary Rayan presented tonight." The pause that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds. Rayan laughed. The sound was almost the right sound. Almost easy, almost warm.
He said Layla loves to be involved.
She gave me a few notes. She's very good with numbers. A few notes. I had spent 40 hours rebuilding his financial narrative from the foundation. I had restructured his 3-year projections, corrected 2 material errors in his cost per mile calculation that would have embarrassed him in front of exactly this room, and drafted the executive summary that Patricia was, at this moment, holding on the handout she had picked up at the registration table. A few notes. I looked at Rayan. He did not look back at me. He was already speaking again, pivoting smoothly. The way someone pivots who has practiced this particular move in many mirrors. Patricia was still looking at me. There was something in her expression that I recognized from my own work. She had caught something. She was running numbers in her head. I said to her quietly, "If you have any questions about the financial modeling in that summary, I'm happy to answer them." "I built it," Rayan said, "Layla. We're in the middle of something." I said, "I know." "I built the middle of it too." The second pause lasted longer. Patricia looked from me to Rayan and back again. She said, "Can I get your card?" I gave her my card. My consulting firm card. With my name and title and contact information on it, Rayan's jaw moved. But no words came out. I excused myself from the cluster and walked back toward my seat. My hands were entirely steady. I was, to my own surprise, not trembling. I was not crying. I was not performing calm. I was simply and genuinely calm in the way you become when you have finally decided something that should have been decided a long time ago. My mother caught my arm as I passed her row. She whispered, "What happened over there?" "Rayan looks upset." I said, "Rayan is fine."
He's always fine when I'm around to make sure of it. She frowned.
"What does that mean?" I said, "I'll explain later." Enjoy the rest of the forum. I sat down, folded my hands over my folder, and watched the remaining presentations with complete attention. They were actually quite good. One woman had built a community-supported agriculture network from a single truck and a social media following. Another had developed accessible fitness programming for people with mobility limitations. I listened to both of them with genuine interest and applause that I meant. On the drive home, I made 3 decisions. The first decision was that I was done transferring money. The second decision was that I was going to account for everything. The third decision, the one that took the most courage and the most time, was that I was going to stop protecting Rayan from the consequences of his own choices. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop and a legal pad and did what I do best. I built a complete financial record. Every transfer, every covered bill, every emergency intervention, with dates and amounts and documentation cross-referenced to my bank statements. When I finished, just after 2 in the morning, I had a total $219,460. I looked at that number for a long time. That number was the down payment on a house I had not bought. It was the master's degree program I had deferred 3 times. It was the 6 months of living expenses that would have let me leave my job and start my own practice 2 years earlier. It was the retirement contributions I had reduced twice when Rayan's crises overlapped with my quarterly MAX. It was $219,000 of my life. Handed over in the name of love, used in the name of his story. I did not cry. I made a cup of tea, reviewed the document one more time, saved it in 3 locations, and went to bed. The next morning, Rayan called before 9. I let it ring. He texted, "I need to talk to you about last night." I did not reply. He called again at 10, and again at 11. At noon, he switched to a different approach and sent a long message that began with the word "look," which is never the beginning of an apology, and ended with a request for a bridge payment to cover an equipment loan that was coming due Friday. I read the message once. I did not reply. At 2 in the afternoon, my mother called. I answered because I love my mother and because I knew this conversation was inevitable. She said, "Rayan says you embarrassed him in front of investors last night." I said, "I introduced myself accurately." "That's not embarrassment," she said. "He said you interrupted his conversation." I said, "I was in a conversation." He interrupted mine. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Layla, he was in the middle of something important. You know how much this forum mattered to him?" I said, "Yes. I know exactly how much it mattered. I know because I spent 40 hours preparing his materials for it. I know because I rewrote his financial projections twice. I know because I've spent 2 years and more than $200,000 making sure he had something to present." The silence that followed was different from the others. This one had weight. My mother is not a stupid woman. She knew I had been helping. She had chosen not to know how much, she said, softly. $200,000? I said $219,000. I have documentation for every transfer. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, Layla. I said, Mom, I'm not angry. I need you to understand that. I'm not calling you to fight. I'm telling you the truth because I think you deserve to know it. Another silence. Smaller this time. She said, I didn't know it was that much. I said, I know you didn't. And that's part of what I need to talk to everyone about. I asked her to arrange a family meeting the following Sunday. Just immediate family. Parents, Rayan, me. No aunts, no uncles, no audience. She said she would try. I said, Mom, it's not optional. Please make it happen. She said she would. What happened in the days between that phone call and the Sunday meeting is its own kind of story. Rayan attempted several approaches. The first was continued silence on the request for bridge payment, followed by an escalating text chain that moved from explanatory to pleading to quietly threatening within 48 hours. On Friday morning, he sent a message that said simply, I hope you understand what you're doing to me. I read it and set my phone down and went for a walk. On Friday afternoon, a vendor of his called my mobile number, a number I had apparently been listed on somewhere without my knowledge, asking about an outstanding balance. I told them politely that I was not a representative of the company and gave them Rayan's direct line. On Friday evening, Rayan called Dina, my best friend. He called her directly and told her he was worried about me, that I was making rash decisions, that I seemed to be going through something. Dina called me immediately after and told me every word of it. I said, What did you say to him? She said, I told him that the only rash decision you had ever made was funding his business for 2 years without a proper agreement, and that everything you were doing now sounded entirely rational to me. I said, I love you. She said, I know. Wear something good on Sunday. I wore the green dress again. Not as a statement. Just because it was mine and I liked it, and I was done saving things for later. Sunday came gray and cold, the sky the color of unresolved things. I arrived at my parents' house at 2 o'clock exactly. My mother opened the door before I knocked and looked at me the way mothers look at children they are afraid for. Not afraid of, afraid for. There is a difference, and I could feel it. Rayan was already in the living room. He was sitting in the far chair, the one closest to the window, which I recognized as a positioning choice. He had arranged himself at the maximum possible distance from the center of the room. My father sat on the couch, posture straight, the body language of a man who had been briefed and was waiting to adjudicate. I sat in the center of the room. I had brought the documentation. Printed, organized, one copy each. My mother sat beside my father. No one offered tea. No one made small talk. The room had skipped the preliminaries entirely and gone straight to the part where things were real. Rayan spoke first. He said, I don't know what you think you're doing, but pulling back support right now is the worst possible timing. I'm in the middle of negotiations with 2 new clients. If things fall apart now, it's going to cost me everything, I said, Rayan. You've been in the middle of negotiations with new clients for 2 years? Every crisis arrives while you're in the middle of something, he said. That's not fair. I said, it might not be comfortable, but it's accurate. My father said. Layla, let's keep this civil. I said, Dad, I'm being entirely civil. I'm also being entirely factual, which I think is more useful right now. I set a copy of the documentation in front of each of them. My father and mother both looked at the cover page. Rayan did not touch his copy. My father picked it up. He turned the first page. His eyes moved down the column of dates and amounts with the systematic attention of a man who spent his career reading technical documents. His face did not change expression, but his hands, after a moment, went very still. He said, This is complete? I said, yes. Those are every transfer, every covered invoice, every bridge payment. Cross-reference to my bank statements, which I can provide if anyone wants verification. My mother had opened her copy. She was on the 3rd page. I watched her count quietly under her breath and stopped counting. Rayan still had not touched his copy. He was looking at the window. My father said, 219,000, I said. Yes. He said, Rayan said, she offered. I didn't force her. I said, that's technically true and completely misleading. I offered the first time because I believed in the business and because I love you. Every time after that, I felt like there was no safe way to say no. My father turned a page. He said, there are no repayment records here, I said, because there haven't been any. 4 partial payments in the first year totaling $8,000. Nothing since. Rayan finally turned from the window. His voice had dropped.
He said, I always intended to pay you back. I said, I believe that you believe that.
But intention and action are different things. And after 2 years, I've started to focus on what actually happened rather than what was always about to happen, thought my mother said quietly. Rayan, did you know what she said at the forum? That she built the financial presentation? He said, she helped with some materials. My father looked at him. He said, is that what you call it? Rayan said, she's a consultant. It's what she does. I said, I'm a consultant who was paid nothing, credited as nothing, and introduced to a room of investors as someone who gave you a few notes. While standing in front of materials I built. While wearing a dress I almost returned twice to cover your expenses. The room was very quiet, I said. I'm not telling you this to punish you. I'm telling you because I think we have all been operating inside a story that isn't true. And I'm not able to stay inside that story anymore, my mother said. What story? I said the story where Rayan's success is all his and his struggles are shared. The story where I support without being acknowledged, contribute without being counted, and quietly absorb whatever is needed while everyone calls it love. My father set down the document. He looked at my mother. Something passed between them that I couldn't fully read but felt like the slow arriving of something they had both. Separately, already begun to know, he said. Rayan, what's your actual financial position? Rayan said nothing. My father said. Not what you're expecting or negotiating. What's the actual current number? Rayan said. Dad, it's complicated. My father said. Give me a number. Another silence. Then Rayan said, approximately 400,000 in liabilities including Layla's. Maybe 110 in viable receivables if the 2 contracts close. Which they will. My father closed his eyes briefly.
He said, when were you going to tell us this? Rayan said, when things turned around.
I said, that's the same answer he gave me 80 months ago. My father looked at Rayan for a long moment. Then he said something I had not expected and have not forgotten. He said, you let your sister carry this alone, Rayan said. She didn't have to. My father said. She felt like she did. That matters. Rayan looked at him with something that I recognized even across the distance between us. It was the look of someone whose safety net has just shifted shape. He had believed, I think, that even if I withdrew, our parents would cushion the fall. That my father's disappointment would be redirected toward me eventually. That the story of the family would resemble itself with him at the center. The way it always had. My father's words had just suggested that it would not. My mother turned to me. She said, what do you need? That question. Simple, direct, addressed to me, asking about what I needed. I sat with it for a moment because I wasn't sure I could answer it without my voice breaking. I said, I need the family to see clearly. Not to blame anyone, not to have a trial. Just to see what actually happened. She said, I see it. I said, I need Rayan to acknowledge it specifically. Not in general. Not in the language of things got complicated. Specifically, she looked at Rayan. Rayan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I used you. I knew how to ask in the right way. And I kept asking, and I told myself it was temporary every single time, and it never was. And I didn't correct Dad's toast at your cousin's wedding 3 years ago when you said I built the company with my own resources because it was easier not to. And I called you a few notes because I didn't want those people to look at me differently, and it was wrong. The last 2 words were very small. But they were specific. They were the truth. I said, thank you, he said. I don't know if the business survives this, I said. I know. He said, if it doesn't, it's not your fault, I said. I know that too. My father picked up the document again.
He said, I'd like to understand the full picture.
What would a realistic repayment structure look like? I said, I've already drafted one. It's the last page. He turned to it. My mother leaned over to look. Rayan, after a moment, picked up his own copy and found the page. The proposed structure was not aggressive. I hadn't designed it to be. I had consulted with a financial counselor friend who specialized in family debt situations. And together we had built something that was honest without being punitive. A 5-year schedule based on a percentage of verifiable monthly revenue. A minimum monthly payment during the first year while the company either stabilized or wound down. A clear provision for the event of liquidation. My father read it carefully.
He said, "This is reasonable." Rayan said, "I can try." I said, "Trying isn't enough."
I need a signed agreement reviewed by both of our attorneys. Not because I don't love you. Because I have learned the hard way that love without structure is not protection. It's exposure. He nodded. Once. My mother said, "Are you going to be all right?" I understood she was asking me, not Rayan. That, in its own small way, felt like the beginning of something repaired. I said, "I'm going to be better than all right. I've already started." I told them about the promotion conversation with my senior partner, the one who had noticed the quality of my independent work over the past year and had begun discussions about a partnership track. I told them about the master's program I was now seriously considering for the following fall. I told them about the apartment I was going to look at the following week. A 2-bedroom with a second room I intended to use as an actual home office rather than the corner of my current studio, where I had spent hundreds of hours working on Rayan's projections. My mother cried a little. Not dramatically. The quiet kind. My father said, "You should have told us sooner." I said, "Probably. But I needed to understand it myself first." Rayan looked at me across the room. He said, "What happens now?" "With us," I said, "I don't know yet. I think we build something new if we're going to build anything. But I can't do that from the same position I've been in. You have to be a different kind of brother, and I have to stop being the kind of sister who disappears into someone else's story," he said. "I don't know how to do that." I said, "That's honest." "That might be the best thing you've said today." He almost smiled. It was tired and small and genuine. The real one. The one I remembered. I did not smile back yet. But I noted it. In the weeks that followed, the company's situation played out the way reality plays out when the scaffolding is removed. 2 of the pending contracts fell through when due diligence revealed incomplete insurance documentation. 1 client suspended their agreement pending financial stability verification. The office manager, a competent young woman named Selene who had joined 6 months ago with real enthusiasm, resigned with a professional and entirely justified letter of concern. Rayan spent 3 days in what I understood, from third-party accounts, to be a genuine reckoning. Not a performance. Not the strategic recalibration of a man planning his next appeal. An actual confrontation with the distance between the person he had been presenting and the person he was. He called me on day 4. He said, "I've been talking to a business restructuring consultant. She thinks there's a viable path if I scale down significantly, release 3 contracts, and rebuild over 2 years with a cash-positive operating model from month 1. I said, "That sounds right," he said. "It means selling the equipment I own outright, letting 2 people go, and moving the office to a co-working space," I said. "That also sounds right," he said. "It's humbling." I said, "Yes." "I imagine it is." A pause. Then he said, "I also called the financial counselor whose name was on the repayment plan you drafted. I have an appointment Thursday." I said, "Good," he said, "Layla. I know sorry doesn't cover it." I said, "It doesn't. But it's a start. What covers it is a different life from here. Different choices. Different behavior." "That's what I'm waiting to see," he said. "Okay. Patricia Holt, the managing partner I had given my card to at the forum, emailed me 10 days after the event. She apologized for the delay and said she had looked into my firm's work and was interested in a conversation about potential advisory engagements. Her fund was expanding its portfolio support team, and she was looking for someone with rigorous financial modeling experience and a demonstrated ability to communicate complex narratives. Clearly, I read that email 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Dina with the subject line, "The green dress paid for itself." Dina replied with 4 words and a screenshot. The screenshot was of a note she had written herself 2 years earlier when I had called her, crying after covering Rayan's 3rd emergency and wondering aloud if I was being naive or generous or both. The note said, "Layla is the most financially competent person I know. When she stops funding his story and starts funding her own, watch what happens. I printed it and put it on my refrigerator. My meeting with Patricia was 3 weeks later. In a glass-walled conference room in a building that looked out over the city's financial district. She was direct in the way that people are direct when they have been in rooms long enough to know that directness saves time. She asked about my methodology, my client experience, my areas of strongest expertise. She asked, at one point, how I had built Rayan's operation summary, and whether the projections had been stress-tested against realistic downside scenarios. I said they had. I said I had modeled 3 scenarios: optimistic, moderate, and adverse. I said the adverse scenario had proven most predictive, she said. Why didn't the company follow the adverse case recommendations? I said. Because the person making the decisions was more committed to the optimistic story than the accurate one. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that happens a lot. The modeling is only as useful as the decision-maker's willingness to act on it, she said. Have you ever considered building a practice specifically around founder financial literacy? Teaching early-stage founders how to read their own numbers? Build realistic models? Understand the difference between revenue and runway? I had not, specifically. But as she said it, something settled into place with the quiet authority of things that are correct. I said, I think I might be ready for that, she said. Let's talk about what that structure could look like. We talked for 2 hours. Three months after the forum, I moved into the 2-bedroom apartment. The second room has a desk, a good lamp, a whiteboard, and a bookshelf that I filled slowly over several weekends from a used bookshop near the university. It is the first room I have ever had that belongs entirely to me, and to no one else's emergencies. Rayan made his first payment on the restructured agreement in month 2. It was smaller than the scheduled amount. He sent a message explaining the shortfall and projecting the correction the following month. The correction arrived as promised. I did not thank him for paying me back. He had not thanked me for the 2 years of funding his growth. We were in different territory now, both of us learning the language of it as we moved. My father called me one evening in January, unannounced, just to talk. Not about Rayan, not about the family situation. He had been thinking, he said, about what I had told them at the meeting, about feeling like there was no safe way to say no. He said he had been a father who made one of his children feel that way without knowing it. And he had been thinking about that for weeks. And he wanted me to know that he saw it now, and it would not continue. It was not a speech. It was barely a paragraph. But it was specific, and it was sincere, and it cost him something to say it. I could hear that. And so it landed the way things land when they cost something. I said, Thank you, Dad, he said. You were always the one holding things together. Layla, we should have made sure you knew we saw that, I said. I know you see it now. That's what matters, he said. Your mother and I are proud of you, I said. I know that too. After we hung up, I sat for a while at my desk in the second bedroom with the good lamp on, and the whiteboard full of notes from my latest client engagement. The city was quiet outside. The lamp made a small warm circle. I thought about the night of the forum, about the folder in my lap and the green dress, and the moment Patricia asked if I was with the company, and I said, I'm Rayan's sister. About how much I have folded into that sentence without meaning to. The years, the money, the silence, the making myself invisible so someone else could be seen. I thought about who I was now. Sitting in my own space, building my own work, repaying myself in a different currency. Not money. Something more foundational. The knowledge that my own name is worth saying in a room full of people who need to hear it. The agreement with Rayan is still in process. 2 years minimum on the repayment schedule. We do not speak every day. We are not close in the old way, the unexamined way. The way that was built on a version of me that absorbed without asking and gave without accounting. We are building something different, slower, more honest. The kind of relationship that might actually last because it is made of real materials. Instead of the illusion of unconditional. He sent me a message last month with a link to a podcast episode about founder financial literacy. The message said only, thought you'd find this interesting. Turns out it's a real gap in how early companies are supported. I listened to the episode while walking. I sent back. I know. I'm building something around it. I'll tell you more when it's further along. He sent a thumbs up. It was a small exchange. It was the first one in years that did not contain a request or a crisis or a shape that I needed to respond to with money or silence. Or both. It was just two people learning how to be related without one of them disappearing. I don't know where this story ends. Stories like this don't end so much as they shift. The weight redistributes. The architecture changes. What I know is this: I'm a financial consultant who spent 2 years funding someone else's story while believing that was the same as love. I was wrong. Love is not measured in wire transfers. Love does not require you to make yourself invisible so someone else can be seen. Love does not mean absorbing the consequences of another person's choices. Until you have no capacity left for your own. I am 32 years old and I am living in a 2-bedroom apartment with a room that belongs entirely to my own work. I am in conversation with a managing partner about building a practice that actually uses the skills I spent years applying without credit. I am enrolled in a master's program beginning in the fall. I have a savings account that is growing again. I have a folder on my laptop called My Own Record, and it contains every achievement, every client result, every piece of work I have done in my own name. The green dress is hanging in my closet. I wear it when I feel like it, not when I think I've earned it. The difference between those two things is something I am still learning. But I am learning it in my own apartment, at my own desk, under my own light. And if you have ever sat in a room and watched someone accept credit for your life's work, I want you to know something. The moment you choose to be accurately named is the moment the room begins to change. It does not change easily. It does not change without cost. The people who benefited from your invisibility will call your visibility selfish. They will call your documentation cruel. They will call your boundaries an act of aggression against people who were only ever trying to succeed. Let them call it what they want. You know what it is? It is the beginning of a life built in your own name. Asterisk. So let me ask you directly. Has there been someone in your life who accepted your help, your money, your time, your expertise, and then stood in a room full of people and called it their own achievement? And if so, what did you do about it? And what do you wish you had done differently? Because I think you already know the answer. And I think that answer is the first honest thing you've said to yourself in a very long time. Say it out loud. Even if no one can hear you yet. The saying is the beginning, the rest follows.